The rule, I believe, is that government will spend whatever the tax system will raise, plus as much more as it thinks it can get away with. And I think you will find it hard to find any historical evidence contradicting that proposition. So,
hello folks, I'm making this video because I wanted to just quickly on the situation at Eskom. Now, a lot of people don't seem to understand just how much trouble this company is in, and not just how much trouble the company is in, but how much trouble this company alone puts South Africa in. Now, let me explain it like this. In 2007, Eskom had a total net debt of around 40 billion rand. 10 years later, in 2017, and their debt had grown to around 400 billion, sitting at around 419 billion rand at the moment. Now, a lot of people don't understand how big this size is. Let me break it down even further. If you look at South Africa's budget deficit, right? So the difference between the amount that we get in revenues, tax revenue, and the amount that government spends, we have a budget deficit of around 249 billion rand. So to put that in context again, Eskom's debt is bigger than government's budget deficit. That's a big number, okay? Now, what Eskom is asking for at the moment is they are asking for 100 billion of that debt to be taken onto national government's balance sheet. In other words, they want national treasury to take that debt away from them so that they can be left financing the rest of the debt, which will be around 300 billion. Now, that in and of itself is a dangerous situation for South Africa. And again, let me explain why this is so dangerous for those that don't seem to understand this. If Eskom gets their way and National Treasury agrees to take this debt and put it on our national balance sheet, what that means is that they are increasing the debt portfolio that they have. So at the moment, South Africa has a net debt of just around 3 trillion rand. Okay, it may be less, it may be around 2.5 trillion, but it's somewhere in that arena, between 2.5 and 3 trillion rand. Now, the problem with National Treasury taking on the 100 billion of Eskom's debt is that it essentially adds to South Africa's total net debt. Okay, so if our national debt is sitting at 2.8, taking Eskom's 100 billion in debt adds to that, so it becomes 2.9 trillion. And again, the problem with that is that it increases the loan payments and the loan repayments that we have to make every year, which at the moment stand at around 220 billion rand per year. Now, adding this 100 billion of Eskom's debt to our national balance sheet means that we now have to pay an extra 20 odd billion in terms of our loan repayment every single year. What that does is it increases the debt financing cost as a percentage of GDP. In other words, we're spending more and more money every single year just to pay back the interest on our debt, because we've now increased our debt profile, or we've increased the net debt by taking on Eskom's debt. So if National Treasury does that, it's a huge problem because of the following. If you remember correctly, in the last 24 months, South Africa has been downgraded to junk status by Fitch Ratings and Moody's. All right, so in other words, our bonds and our sovereign credit rating is sub-investment grade. for Moody's and Fitch. The only ratings agency that has not downgraded us, or at least the only one that counts, is S&P Global. There's other ratings agencies out there that have us at investment grade, but none of them matter. The only ones that matter are Fitch, Moody's, and S&P. Now, why this is important? If S&P realizes that the National Treasury is taking on more debt, which is something that they spoke out against in one of their outlook statements. If National Treasury increases debt financing cost as a percentage of GDP to more than 5%, which is what's likely going to happen. In fact, it's not likely, it's going to happen, right? So the percentage that we pay back in interest as a percentage of GDP increases above 5%. This is not something that they want. And for them, this is very risky and means that we're struggling to pay back what we already owe. If that happens, we are 100% on a one-way train to a junk rating for S&P as well. Once we get to a junk rating for S&P, we're in big trouble, because what's going to happen is there's this thing called the Citi World Bond Index, and all kinds of fund managers all over the world are required to ensure that all their bonds are above investment grade, right? So are not junk. If we drop below junk and we become sub-investment grade, all these bond managers will be forced by law to withdraw all of their funding and all of their debt purchases from South Africa, which will basically take us out of that Citi World Bond Index. What that'll mean is that we'll see a crash in South African bonds. We'll see a crash in South Africa's ability to borrow more money, which is a problem since we have a budget deficit of about 50 billion every year. Right? So it means we will not be able to borrow from international markets. It'll be very, very difficult, right? Because people just simply will not be able to trust that we're going to be able as a country to pay that back. Now, if we do take on Eskom's debt, whether it's 100 billion, whether it's 200 billion, or the entire 400 billion, that is a problem. It can't happen. If it does happen, rest assured, we are going to junk. And that is a worst case scenario that you do not want happening, because the rand will tank so fast that we will wake up in the morning with a rate of inflation that we simply can't explain, and one that we simply can't handle. I mean, that's when we're going to start seeing flames, to put it in a way that makes sense. We're going to see some proper flames. So that's something we don't want happening. So South Africa at the moment is in a bit of a catch-22 situation, because if Eskom collapses, simply because it can't produce, it can't generate any power, well, the South African economy is done, right? No businesses are going to be able to run. We're not going to be able to run mines. We're not going to be able to run law firms. We're not going to be able to run financial firms. Nothing is going to run without power. And that is a direct threat to our GDP. So even in that case, if that happens, we're still going to go to junk. So we're in a tough situation where the only other alternative that I can see is for Eskom to be broken up into bits and pieces and to be sold off to private sector players who are then going to refinance those parts that have been sold off and somehow try and regain generating capacity. Other than that, I really don't see any other option. So we are in a very dangerous situation, and make no mistake, we got here because of the politics of this country. We got here because of the ruling ANC party. There is no other reason. Do not make the mistake of thinking that, you know, this was just a few individuals at the top who decided to loot and you know, somehow broke Eskom. No, we got here over a number of years, over a series of warnings that have been ignored by government. I mean, since 1997, these guys have been getting warnings that South Africa's generating capacity is decreasing, that mines are shutting down, particularly coal mines that supply Eskom. have been getting warnings. The corruption that we saw with Optimum and the Guptas, that played a role, yes, but it's been a slow collapse over the last 10, 15 years because of government's incompetence. Do not get that mistaken. And now we find ourselves in a situation where there's really no other option. If we take Eskom's debt into national treasury and it becomes part of their balance sheet, we're going to get downgraded. On the other hand, if Eskom, retains its debt but can't pay it back, as it clearly can't at the moment, we're still going to junk because it's basically going to wreck the economy. The only other option left is equity partners and to break the company up. I just don't see anything else. And I predict that that's probably what's going to happen. There's really nothing else that can be done. And if President Cyril Ramaphosa is serious of his new dawn and taking this country forward, that's literally the only thing he can do. If any of you out there listening think there's any other option, please let me know. I'm all ears. But having been in this industry for a long time, that's literally the only option that's left. Now, the question is, what happens if they choose one of the two bad options? In other words, they choose not to take their debt and they can't privatize it, or they don't want to privatize it, they don't want to sell it off. Or what happens now if they do choose to take it onto the balance sheet and we then get downgraded to junk? What do you do then? Because then we're in a real mess. I'll make another video later on in terms of how to protect yourself as far as asset protection plans. But the one thing you need to start thinking about is taking your money offshore. Now there's many investment vehicles that allow that. And there's many little tricky ways that you can use to kind of protect some of your money from the kind of hyperinflation that might occur. And I'm not saying that's the only thing that's going to happen, but it's certainly going to happen if one of those scenarios takes place. But yeah, that's a subject for another video. In this video, I just simply wanted to highlight the intractable situation that we're in. I mean, it's not intractable in that there is a solution, but it's a solution that a lot of people hate, particularly in a country like South Africa, where we're highly unionized, we're highly radicalized as well. You've got parties like the EFF that simply don't understand economics or refuse to. They see privatization as evil. Everything must be nationalized. But in a situation like this, reality has to set in. There's just no choice. There is just no choice. And now, consider the fact that Eskom is not the only SOE that's bankrupt. SAA is bankrupt, and the taxpayer has basically been funding that company for the last 5-10 years. Denel is in trouble as well. A lot of state entities are just in dire financial trouble, and they may face the same dilemma in a couple of years, if not, in the next couple of months. These things are very dangerous for South Africa. I don't think people understand just how bad the situation is. You really need to start thinking about asset protection strategies. You really need to start thinking about what you're going to do to protect yourself should things go pear-shaped, because at the moment it's certainly looking like they will go pear-shaped. Not to be defeatist, but that's reality. If you have any suggestions in terms of what can be done with the situation, or if you think I'm wrong about this whole thing, let me know in the comments below.